When we enter an inquiry as enormous as where we might be banishing the mythical feminine, we can either have a sense of resistance come up where it's hard for us to even be honest and conscious of where that might be happening, or we may just find that we don't have a way of entering into that in a way that seems at all tangible, at all allows us to make contact with things that are actually happening in our lives. That's where myths and fairy tales and folk tales can really help. And in this particular episode, the folk tale that really speaks to this question is Foxwoman. So I began this episode by telling my own version of that folktale, which is actually a first for, I think, 10 years of the Be Mythical podcast in all its guises. I think it's the first time I've actually just told a story. And it felt like a particularly special one to tell. It has a real personal meaning for me. And what I noticed in the telling of it and in the questions and reflections and invitations I made afterwards is the people who joined me for the live making found it allowed them to make contact with the symbols around this question of the mythical feminine, the way that we banish it. It allowed them to make contact with those symbols inside of themselves in such a deep and clear way. So this is something that I see over and over again, that story can give to us, myths can give to us, folk tales, fairy tales open us into this world of enchantment, but not just enchantment, an enchantment that we can actually use to make conscious the changes that we're being called to make in our lives. So without further ado, let's dive in and see what Foxwoman has to show you of your own soul. Hello and welcome to April's All the Everything. And it's on even the word topic doesn't feel like it quite does justice to this, but it's on the topic of Foxwoman, how we banish the mythical feminine and the price we all pay for doing so. This is one that is especially dear to my heart, both the story of Foxwoman and also this whole conversation around how we banish the mythical feminine. And it's also a particularly special episode in that I'm going to begin by sharing my own soul's knowing of this particular story. And it's not something I've done on the show before, and it was something I was very clearly called to this time. And so it's a new thing. It's a new thing that I'll be doing for the first time on this show, and it may well be something I do more often. We'll see. What I will also say is this, I think, is going to be similar to episodes I've done before, where it's a little bit also like a class, where my invitation to you is to, rather than just listen, to really engage with it, to really allow yourself to take part and receive the full medicine and the full activation that's available in this. So a couple of things. I would really suggest, if it's possible, to go and get something you can write on. Clearly, that could be electronic or a pen and paper. Not so much when I'm telling you the story, but afterwards, I'll be making some invitations that my sense is you'll get the most out of if you actually allow yourself to capture the answers to the questions as I ask them. So I would really suggest, if you can, that you have something you can capture those answers on, plus as well any notes that you want to take as we journey through. I'll also say that when I'm reading I'm not going to read it, I'm actually going to just tell you the story in the old tradition of oral storytelling. But as I'm telling you the story, it may well, firstly, for those of you who naturally kind of get pulled into trance, could have quite a kind of trance-like effect. And so possibly not something to listen to whilst you're driving, or otherwise need to have your kind of full awareness, ordinary consciousness available. I would also suggest that if you can, really just close your eyes and allow yourself to be taken on the journey by the story. You're going to allow yourself to have sensations and images arise that otherwise might not be the case. So very similar, if you've done, for example, a shamanic journey, in a similar way, stories can take us to similar places. So my invitation to you is, when I begin telling the story, is to really close your eyes and allow it to take you on a journey, which again clearly is not sensible if you're driving. So for all those reasons, if you can, listen to this when you have the opportunity to really close your eyes and go inwards and be taken on that journey, so much the better. And then only then I would suggest picking up your pen and paper or whatever you're going to make notes with, and allowing a different part of your consciousness to come into play. So this topic, I just want to give you a little bit of backstory to this, and I'll probably touch on this a little bit more as we journey. Foxwoman first came to me a couple of years ago, and by now I'm sure you know that much of the work I do is shamanic in nature, and often the particular archetypes or spirits or deities that are calling me to work with them often show up in a material form first, or alongside. And so this particular time that it happened a couple of years ago, I had taken a kind of wrong turn, in quote marks, if there is such a thing. And I was coming home kind of along the country lane near to my house, and there was a dead fox in my path. And so I pulled the car over and picked the whole fox up and brought the fox home. And I was very clearly called to work with the fox's tail. So I buried the rest of the fox and kept the tail, with the intention of working with it in a kind of shamanic honouring way to keep it. That brought challenges of all kinds, not least the fact, at this point, a couple of years ago, I had got quite used to working with animals in this way. You may know that I'm a lifelong vegetarian, vegan for close to 30 years. And so that's been a huge thing for me, to learn how to work with the bodies of animals when it's been something that I've just not come into any sort of intimacy with for most of my life. However, by the time this happened with the fox, I had been a number of years along that path, so it wasn't quite as challenging as it would have been prior. However, as you'll know, if you've ever come into contact with a fox, and as you'll hear certainly in the story of Foxwoman, there is a very strong smell that comes with a fox, which I was being brought very present to in the work with the fox's tail. I was talking to a friend of mine about this, and then he pointed me towards this fairy tale about Foxwoman, which was so perfectly timed, because of course it talks directly to the smell. Well, I say of course, you don't know yet, but it does. It talks directly to the smell of the fox. And so that took me on a really deep journey with Foxwoman and with the fox. And then the fox came back into my awareness, and the story of Foxwoman came back into my awareness in recent weeks. And it first came, those of you that are watching on video, and so I didn't mention this, when that happened a couple of years ago, I didn't manage to save the tail. So I did all of the work, and clearly there was something left undone, and I didn't manage to retain the tail. And then a couple of years later, this fox's tail just appeared in my life. my husband actually found it and brought it back for me. He knows how much, these things mean to me. And for me, it's a kind of, a real love language to bring me a gift of this kind. And so he brought me back this foxtail, which I've been working with. And so that was the first instance, and the synchronicity of the tail being the part that I wasn't able to keep the last time, and then it coming back into my life now was too much to ignore. And then the mythical quest we're journeying with in Junio this month is all about devoting to commune with a particular spirit or deity. So very much this kind of work. And as I was in the ceremony where we opened up this mythical quest, Foxwoman and that whole journey I'd taken 2 years ago came into my awareness, and I was going to talk about it in the ceremony. And for some reason, I didn't. Then, as I was planning to do this month's All the Everything, I was talking to Jonathan and saying, I've got these ideas of what to do. Have you got any suggestions? And he said, how about you read a myth or a fairy tale and then work with that? And as soon as he said that, I was like, oh, there's something there. And I could feel some resistance to it. And then realise, of course, it's Foxwoman. She really wants to take her place and be honoured and have her magic and her beauty and her power brought into people's awareness. So that's why I'm here and bringing Foxwoman onto the Be Mythical podcast in a way that I haven't before. Okay, so I am going to tell you my own knowing of this story. There's, as ever with any fairy tale, any myth, any story, there's all kinds of versions. The version that I was first made aware of was a telling by the incredible storyteller Martin Shaw. I believe the origins of this particular fairy tale, this particular kind of version of it, has Inuit origins. But I know there's similar figures that appeared in other stories. I think there's one that's, I believe, an ancient Chinese tale as well that has a similar set of archetypes. So as these things do, they show up in all different forms across the world. And my own telling of this is probably most aligned to the one that Martin Shaw talks about. But of course, this will be my own version, as has been, I guess, something that's been activated in my own soul around it. So I suggest you make yourself comfortable, close your eyes if you would like to, and I will begin. Once upon a time, there was a hunter, a lonely hunter. And this hunter was returning back from a day out in the wild hunting. And as he approached his cottage, he saw smoke swirling from the chimney. And he lived alone. He had no visitors, and so there should be no smoke swirling from his chimney. So he approached his cottage carefully. He entered the door. There was no one there, and yet there was a pot of food bubbling on the stove. He looked around, and the place was tidy. He went over to his favourite chair, and on the chair there were a pair of his trousers that had a hole, and they'd been stitched with such care and such kindness. So all of this, as you can imagine, was a real mystery to the hunter. Who had done this? There was no one in his life that would do these things for him, and yet they had been done. So he ate the meal, which was delicious. He enjoyed the beauty, the newfound beauty of his cottage. And as much as it was a mystery, he appreciated the blessings of it. The next morning, he went back out to hunt, wearing his newly repaired trousers. When he got back that evening, he approached his cottage, and yet again he saw smoke rising from the chimney. This time, of course, he was having some sense of what to expect when he passed the threshold. And yet again, when he entered, there was a pot of stew bubbling on the stove. The smell of it filled the air. The place yet again had been made beautiful. There was a jar of wild flowers on his table, probably the first jar of wild flowers there ever had been on his table. He looked around and again felt this sense of curiosity, maybe a slight sense of fear, but also deep appreciation for this care, this nurturing, this love, this beauty that had appeared suddenly in his life. The next day, he got up and went out to hunt yet again. Only this time, he thought, I'll return home a bit earlier than I have done in the last couple of days, and maybe I will see whoever is visiting me firsthand. So, as he approached the cottage, as he was about to come home, he saw a fox run into the cottage. He followed behind it, and there, stood at the stove, was a woman. But he knew, as hunters do, that this wasn't just a woman. This was part woman, part fox, part spirit. She had beautiful red hair flowing down her back. She had curves of the kind he had not seen in a very long time. And she, in the way that women do, knew she was being looked at. And she turned. And she said to him, I am the woman of this house. And he knew better than to argue with her and was very pleased. So that night, they both sat down to eat her beautiful food. They sat there with the jar of wildflowers, and he found a candle from somewhere and lit it. And they had a wonderful evening together, telling stories, singing songs. And when night came along, they shared a bed. And they had a night of the kind of lovemaking that poems have been written about. There was a meeting of souls. Real union took place. The next morning, she was there, still in his life, still woman of the house. And it wasn't until then he noticed she had hung her fox's pelt on the back of the door. And of course, it made sense. He knew she was part woman, part fox, part spirit. He went off out hunting, whistling as he went. A man so happy to have the blessings of this woman in his life. That bliss continued for days and weeks and months, only grew as they got to know each other, and her love and her beauty and her magic and her nurturing all poured into the hunter and into the house and into his life. And yet, there was just one problem. That pelt of hers had that particular smell that foxes have. It is a powerful, regal and wild smell, like that of no other. And as the days and the weeks and the months went by, it became stronger and stronger. The hunter noticed it felt as though it was permeating his very being. He could smell it all the time. It was in his clothes. Even when he went out hunting, he could still smell it. And one night, he said to her, "My dear, I love you being here so much. It's the happiest I've ever been. Apart from just one thing. The smell of your pelt is so strong. I'm finding it really difficult to smell anything else. Would you mind just putting it outside? Just hanging it on the tree outside so it doesn't fill the house with its smell." Foxwoman didn't say anything. She just smiled, and they went to bed as usual, and it was as if it hadn't been said. And yet it had been said. The days continued, and the love continued, and yet the smell got stronger, and the hunter's irritation, annoyance, intolerance to the smell grew too. He mentioned it again and again until one night they sat down to dinner and he could tolerate it no more. And he banged his fist on the table and he said, "Get that pelt out of the house." The next morning, he awoke and the house felt different. Foxwoman had gone, taken her pelt with her. She was nowhere to be seen. It is said to this day, he can be seen standing in the doorway of the cottage. His whole heart, his whole body, his whole soul aching for the scent of Foxwoman. But it's not just the hunter who aches for the scent of Foxwoman. It's all of us. So that's the tale of Foxwoman and the heartbreaking story of her and the hunter. And I'd love to know, what did she show to you? What symbols, what sensations, what experiences, what memories did it evoke for you? And so if you have something to write on, I'd like to ask you a number of questions so you can see exactly what she is for you. I will also share what I've seen of Foxwoman and what she can mean for different people at different times. But I'd like, before I do that, for you to have the opportunity to really touch into what she brings to you. So my first question is, for you, when you think of the Foxwoman and you think of the story, what does she symbolize to you? And you might want to write this in a line, or it might be, say, 5 separate words. Maybe take a moment first, close your eyes. What does Foxwoman symbolize to you? And when you're clear, write that down. And the next question, what does her pelt symbolize to you? And it could be that there's answers in common, It might be that for you, she symbolizes, the foxwoman and her pelt symbolize the same thing, but you might notice there's nuances. So write that down. And lastly, what does the hunter symbolize to you? What did he evoke for you? And again, once you're clear, write that down and really trust yourself. Like however strange those words are, those images, sensations are, they don't need to make sense. Really just allow whatever's there to be captured. Wonderful. So again, because this is an opportunity for me to ask you to share with me what you're seeing, I'll share what I've seen about the different symbols evoked by the foxwoman, her pout, and the hunter. So the foxwoman, I think, is symbolized so well at the beginning of the story when we first meet her, where she is really what you could say is the accepted, welcome face of the feminine. Certainly not when we very first meet her, when there's the mystery and the unknown, but once we know her, once we understand what she's doing there and receiving her gifts, the nurturing, the domesticity, that very much inhabiting the wife archetype, this giving to the man. These are all aspects of the feminine that we typically value and welcome and see as appropriate and acceptable. And just really worth recognizing that it isn't because that has no place or is wrong or doesn't have value, but we will often want that aspect of foxwoman without her pelt. And we do this again, and I'm going to speak much more about this shortly. We will do this internally and we'll also do this externally, i.e. we'll do this to parts of ourselves and we'll also project this out onto others. So her pelt could be seen to represent certainly wildness, power, enchantment. It was a real symbol, of course, of the very fact that she was part fox. If it wasn't for the pelt, she wouldn't be part fox. You wouldn't know. There is a kind of intoxication that comes with her. Of course, in the story, the intoxication came via the smell, but it's an intoxication of another kind too. It's into a different worldview, a different way of life. Magic, certainly. Mystery, certainly. And also for that reason, when we think of things like the mystery, the unknown, there is a darkness that comes with that. There is this venturing into something where the sun can't shine. And the pelt also symbolizes the priestess, the access to a different realm, let's say, a connection to spirit and magic that is beyond what we typically see as possible when we are raised in a culture where the only access points are seen to be organized religion. And for that reason, if the pelt represents the priestess, she also represents the goddess. So these are all things that in recent times, when I say recent times, we're talking really probably in the last couple of thousand years at least, have not been welcome, have been scary, dangerous even. And we will do what we can to banish. We will banish it externally to have ourselves feel safe, and we'll banish it internally so that we can be approved of. And the part of us that does the banishing, of course, is the hunter. The hunter is doing what the hunter needs to do to feel safe, which is to say, I want the foxwoman. I want the love and the beauty and the nurturing that she brings into my life, but only if I don't have to have the enchantment, the intoxication, the magic, the wildness, the power, the mystery. And the more we can recognize each part of this is something that we have a relationship to, it's very rarely the fact that it's very easy to project out there that the hunter only exists in others, or only exists in men, or only exists in the patriarchy, or only exists in organized religion. When we do that, we're not seeing the most powerful thing we can ever see, which is that what resides within us, where the hunter is within us. So it's only by doing so, if we can understand where the hunter resides in us, we are then able to no longer banish the foxwoman and her pelt. We need to make conscious the hunter within in order for that to change. I think what's also really helpful to recognize is, and this goes back to the title of this episode, when we talk about things like the feminine, it can be very easy to think this really is only about women. And of course it isn't. We all pay the price for banishing the mythical feminine. And the story shows that so clearly. The story ends with the hunter standing at the doorway, aching in his heart and his whole body and soul for the center foxwoman. So the story shows us very directly the man in the story is suffering. We don't actually get to see how foxwoman feels. So recognize this. We all suffer when the fullness of the feminine isn't welcome in our lives, in our world. I saw this, it was sort of meant as a kind of funny meme the other day, and it was about tarot, and it said something like, I'll see if I can find this and post it in the Be Mythical Facebook group. It had 2 tarot cards, and one was the devil, and the title of this meme was something like, why the church tells us tarot is evil. I'm doing this from memory, so the words aren't exact. And it had the devil card. And then on the other side, it said why the church actually tells us the tarot is evil. And the card there was the high priestess. And this is not at all me, wanting to make the church wrong. This, I think, is a very archetypal level, is talking about the story of foxwoman and how we are not able to be in relationship with her pelt, and therefore we see her as dangerous. We reject the devil rather than seeing the high priestess. So there's something here for all of us, man or woman. The truth is, when we separate parts of the feminine and say these are welcome and these aren't, we aren't able to be in full relationship to the mythical feminine and the wholeness that she brings to us. But when we are able to be in relationship to the entirety of the mythical feminine, the power, the the regality, her wildness, her magic. From there, we are able to be in union. So the fullness of the masculine with the fullness of the feminine. And what's really interesting in this fairy tale, and it's actually mirrored with a book that I've just almost finished. If again you're watching on video, you'll see it's this book, The Sacred Prostitute by Nancy Qualls Corbett. And really wonderful book, and so many themes in the book that mirror this. It's these different faces of the feminine. In the book, there is the mother and the wife, so that initial view that we have of foxwoman. Then there is the, I guess, more sort of profane view of the prostitute that we have in our culture. Then there's the Helen archetype, one of beauty and reverence. And then there's the goddess. And really, the priestess's role in us having any kind of conscious relationship with the goddess. The reason, again, this is important is we all suffer when we aren't in relationship to all faces of the feminine. There was a particular part of this book that I made a note of earlier. Let me see if I can find it. And it's talking, because this is a Jungian book, it's talking about it as the anima, so the man's inner image of woman. She has many faces, many guises. She has lived in the mind's eye of man throughout the ages. The anima, man's inner image of a woman, manifests in each male according to his individual psychology. Every man carries within him the internal image of woman, not the image of this or that particular woman, but a definite feminine image. This image is fundamentally unconscious and a hereditary factor of primordial origin engraved in the living organic system of the man, an imprint or archetype of all the ancestral experiences of female. That quote's from Jung. And this is the really interesting part that follows it. Like a witch, she can cast spells of moodiness, irritability, or depression. And this is the mirrors again, the way the pelt and its smell was intoxicating in a way that was received as negative, received as an irritation. And the invitation for all of us who can feel that truth, they can feel the energy that Foxwoman is bringing alive here, is to ask ourselves, where is this within me? Where is that fullness of the feminine, the power, the magic, the wildness? Where does this reside? Or where does my relationship to that reside? Where am I banishing that? Where am I making that something that is unwelcome? And of course, in a modern world where we really value things being known and productive and something that we can measure via cause and effect, we don't just have, part women, part fox, part spirit, just suddenly rock up in our home. These aspects of the feminine are incredibly unwelcome. So even when we have this notion of, oh my goodness, my relationship to those aspects, those archetypal aspects, is one in which I've been pushing it away, it's really important to recognize it is entirely understandable given the culture we are in. So the first thing to do whenever we notice something like that is to really recognize this is completely understandable, given most of us are trying to stay safe, be accepted, fit in. So the first thing before we do anything else is not to make ourselves wrong for that. There is really, it's the same invitation over and over again, is to recognize the innocence of this, the fact that it is completely understandable, that there'll be this inner child within us that is doing everything it can to stay safe. And if that means we have to banish aspects of the feminine to do so, we will. So that's the place to begin. If you're starting to recognize, again, these places that you've been the hunter and you've banished aspects of the mythical feminine, just pause and just see if you can touch into that part in you that's had to do that to feel safe. And recognize too that the very fact you're hearing something in there suggests you're ready for something to change. But again, that only happens through bringing love, not shame. Just want to pause for a moment and just see what else is speaking to me from that story. What I'm feeling called to right now is to give some examples of ways that I've seen this show up, both personally and also with students over the years, because sometimes it's really helpful to look at these things more archetypally and symbolically the way we have, but then sometimes to really join the dots on like really material, practical ways that these things show up. And of course, you may not have the exact same things, but they may give you a kind of doorways into places to look. So one that I see show up very, very often, only very recently with a student, which is the way that the feminine holds this particular aspect, which we could call the oracle. And it's this knowing of something beyond the material, beyond what's consciously known. And this is an aspect again of the feminine that we really struggle to be in relationship to in this modern world, where we need to be able to kind of like logically track things. Like, how could we possibly know this? And if there isn't a material way we should know this, it's considered useless. And I see this show up, and again, I'm talking here about heterosexual relationships because this is where I see it happen a lot, but it doesn't necessarily have to come in this form, where the woman in the relationship knows something. She has been shown something that comes from beyond space and time and is holding back from sharing that knowledge with the man in her life. Because again, she is playing that, she's probably projecting the hunter on him, that he won't see that's welcome. But of course, this is only ever an internal reflection of what's happening inside us when the internal hunter is saying that's not welcome. So she holds back this knowing of something that, for whatever reason, is really important for him to know. And that's something I see happen over and over again. And of course, these things aren't necessarily something that we can just kind of choose to do differently. Often this in itself, as we start to recognize the way we've banished this aspect of the feminine, we can then think, okay, well, I will now just blurt it out. Whatever this thing is that I've been shown, I'm just going to blurt it out. And then, of course, we will then have the opportunity to be in relationship with a hunter externally. And then we can make that wrong and have that be the reason we don't continue to speak. So all of these things are a continuing invitation to be in relationship to both sides of this dynamic, to the point where, again, the more we're able to be in full conscious relationship to both, the more we can move towards union. So anytime we're making this like the hunter's wrong, the foxwoman's wrong, the pelt's wrong, these are places we're blocked from moving into union, which ultimately happen inside. So that's one example where I see that happen a lot. So this understanding of something intuitively, we might describe it, and holding it back because we think it has no value and isn't welcome in this modern world. What I have seen is as we step more and more into conscious relationship with all parts of these archetypes, the more we do feel free to voice the feminine oracle, and the more appreciatively it's received. I mean, these days, whether it be, for example, in my relationship with my husband or with Jonathan, co-founder of Be Mythical, the level of reverence and value they place on the knowings that come to me outside of ordinary consciousness is, it actually invites me into more reverence and more honor. They've actually taught me about that. And so recognize sometimes our internal hunter can be even more potent than the external representation of it. So recognize how that might show up for you. Let me think of another example here. I've got one coming. I'm just wanting to find some more tangible ways to name this particular one. So again, the beauty of Foxwoman is the fact that she is part spirit, part fox, part woman. And that requires some things. It requires for her to honor those parts of herself. And if we take, for example, the wild aspect, that fox aspect, that animal aspect, and for her to be in full conscious relationship with that part of herself, which we could say is being in full conscious relationship with her body, but also her body's relationship to nature, to the cycles of nature, to the reality of nature, which again, when we are working with these different archetypes and different spirits in a shamanic sense, we really get brought present in the way that I was telling you about with the fox's tail. The way this came into my life wasn't only from a kind of more spiritual sense. I literally had a fox's tail and that pungent scent that I was in direct relationship with. And that can be such a powerful way that we can open into whatever is calling us to have a material manifestation of it, particularly when it brings us back into relationship in a way that we really have lost so much in our culture. This deep connection doesn't even do it justice, but union with wild nature. And it's that connection which, in some forms, the earth herself, nature herself, is seen as an aspect of the feminine. That relationship we have to the feminine, to nature, is again something that we have absolutely banished from our culture. And when we start to get the call back to it, again, it does not fit nicely in the linear lines of our culture, whether it be having a special tree that we visit regularly, whether it be making offerings to a place in nature, whether it be going on a wild wander or doing a sitting out ceremony or doing that for an extended period and entering a vision quest. These are all things that are absolutely our human birthright and yet are seen as something alien to humans in this modern culture. So this is another aspect of Foxwoman that she is inviting us back into, but also pointing us to the way that internal and external hunter will say it's not welcome. And it's not safe and it has no purpose, particularly in a world that values productivity, values things being done for a particular reason that needs to be measurable, needs to be known. Okay, how am I doing for time? Right, I think we're almost towards the end of the show. And this has flown by actually. I'm trying to see if there's anything else that feels important to name before we complete. I think for the moment, I think that there's a lot here already to work with, and I'm noticing that the more I name, in some ways, the more I'm potentially going to play the role of the hunter, rather than step out the way and allow Foxwoman to work her magic. So I'm going to leave that here. But again, my deeper invitation to you is to really allow whatever's shown up for you as you've listened to have its place in your life, for this to be an ongoing inquiry, to notice when the hunter and the foxwoman and her pelt are showing up in your life. If you would like to journey more deeply with Foxwoman and also working in this way, then please do join us at Unio. It's our new academy for old souls, and we work in all of these kinds of shamanic, alchemical ways all the time. Each month we have mythical quest, and this month's is, as I mentioned, particularly synchronistic in that we're working with a particular deity or not archetype so much this month. I mean, it will certainly have an archetypal form, but more directly a deity or a spirit that's calling each of us. And so we're collectively as a community in that particular quest, but each person is going to have a different one that's calling them. And so it could be that this for you is the one, in which case, if you join us at Unio, that will be the one that you'll be supported and guided to work with. And the link for that is bemythical.com/Unio. I would also really recommend, if you are hearing some of what I was talking about in terms of the sacred prostitute, this book is absolutely incredible. So much of, again, the synchronicity of reading this book at the same time as Foxwoman came back into my life, really beautiful, the parallels between them. So that book, The Sacred Prostitute, Eternal Aspect of the Feminine by Nancy Qualls Corbett, is really incredible book. Really highly recommend that. And I would also really recommend checking out Martin Shaw's version of this story. You'll see similarities between the way that he talked and told the story and the way that I did. But of course, his is his and mine is mine. So there's differences too. So if you Google Martin Shaw Foxwoman, I'm sure you'll find it, and I'll see if we can add it to the show notes as well. And please do share with us what came up for you. If you would like to share that in the Be Mythical Facebook group, I'm sure others will find that really rich and invoking to see what showed up for you. And I certainly always enjoy knowing how different episodes like these speak to people. Thank you so much for joining me. This has been, again, a particularly special episode for me, and Foxwoman is so dear to my heart. So the opportunity to share her with you is really precious. Thank you so much. All my love. Mwah. Bye-bye. I very much hope you enjoyed watching that. And if you did and you're not already subscribed, then do hit that bell thingy and subscribe to automatically get each fresh new episode as it's released each week. If you'd like to find out more about the work we do at Be Mythical to guide and support old souls in this new world to live their own unique myth, do hop along to bemythical.com and you'll find out all the ways you can join us and go deeper with us on your own mythical journey. Lots of love for now. Mwah. See you again next week.